Chapter 1. The Easter Invitation. The wind carried a faint chill through the streets of London, though spring had begun to weave its delicate threads across the city. It was a Thursday morning in early April, and Hercule Poirot sat in his meticulously arranged flat at Whitehaven Mansions, savouring the aroma of his morning tisane. The symmetry of his surroundings, the polished mahogany table, the precisely aligned books, the gleam of the silver teaspoon, brought him a quiet satisfaction. Order, he often mused, was the foundation of clarity, and clarity was the cornerstone of truth. On this particular morning, however, his orderly world was interrupted by the arrival of a letter. The envelope, cream-coloured and embossed with a subtle crest, lay atop a small stack of correspondence delivered by his loyal valet Georges. Poirot's moustache twitched as he examined it. The handwriting was elegant but unfamiliar, the postmark indicating it had been sent from a rural address in Sussex. With a practised flick of his letter opener, he extracted a single sheet of thick paper, its contents written in black ink with a flourish that suggested both wealth and intention. "Mon cher Monsieur Poirot," it began, "your reputation as a detective of unparalleled acumen precedes you. I, Sir Reginald Hargrove, humbly request your presence at Blackwood Manor for the Easter weekend. My family gathers to celebrate the holiday, and I believe your company would lend a certain distinction to the occasion. I assure you, there is no cause for alarm, merely a desire to enjoy the festivities with an esteemed guest. Enclosed, you will find details for your journey. I eagerly await your acceptance. Yours sincerely, Sir Reginald Hargrove." Poirot's green eyes narrowed as he read the letter a second time. The words were polite, even obsequious, yet there was something beneath the surface, an undercurrent of urgency that piqued his curiosity. Why would a man of Sir Reginald's stature, a wealthy industrialist known for his reclusive tendencies, invite a detective to a family gathering? Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the arm of his chair. No cause for alarm, the letter claimed, but Poirot knew better than to trust such assurances. In his experience, invitations of this sort often concealed motives far less innocent than they appeared. He turned to the enclosed card, which detailed a train from Victoria Station to the village of Ashford-on-Sea, where a car would collect him tomorrow, Good Friday. The timing intrigued him. Easter, with its themes of sacrifice and resurrection, was a season ripe for drama, and Blackwood Manor, if the society pages were to be believed, was a stage where family tensions simmered beneath a veneer of civility. Sir Reginald's children, 3 if Poirot recalled correctly, were rumoured to be at odds over their father's fortune, and the manor's staff, though loyal, had their own whispered histories. Poirot rose, adjusting his waistcoat with a precise tug, and crossed to the window. The London street below bustled with early spring activity. Vendors hawking flowers, a boy delivering newspapers, the rhythmic clip of a horse-drawn carriage. He considered declining the invitation. After all, he had planned a quiet Easter, perhaps attending a service at St. Mary's, or indulging in a new volume of philosophy. Yet the letter gnawed at him. Sir Reginald's words, carefully chosen, hinted at something unspoken, a puzzle, perhaps, or a plea. Poirot's little grey cells stirred, restless for a challenge. By noon, he had made his decision. He penned a brief acceptance, entrusting it to George for posting, and began preparations for the journey. His mind, however, was already at work sifting through what he knew of the Hargrove family. Sir Reginald, widowed a decade ago, was a man of 65, his wealth built on steel and railways. His eldest son, Edward, was a barrister with political ambitions, though whispers of gambling debts trailed him. The daughter, Beatrice, had married a French artist, only to return to England alone after a scandalous separation. The youngest, Clara, was a recluse, her health fragile, but her intellect sharp. Then there were the others who orbited the family. A devoted housekeeper, a cryptic vicar who frequented the manor, and a cousin with a questionable past. Poirot's moustache curved upward. Such a cast promised intrigue. As evening fell, Poirot dined alone, his thoughts drifting to the symbolism of Easter. The holiday, with its rituals of renewal, often brought buried truths to light, much like the resurrection it celebrated. He wondered if Sir Reginald's invitation was truly about festivity, or if it masked a deeper need for his particular skills. The crest on the envelope, a stylized hare encircled by ivy, lingered in his mind. Hares, he recalled, were symbols of fertility and vigilance, apt for a mystery perhaps, where secrets multiplied and watchfulness was essential. Before retiring, Poirot packed his valise with care. A tailored suit for dinner, a warmer coat for the Sussex chill, and his trusted notebook, where he would record every detail, no matter how trivial. The little details, he murmured to himself, they are the threads that weave the tapestry of truth. He extinguished the lamp and stood in the darkened room, his silhouette sharp against the moonlight. Blackwood Manor awaited, and with it a mystery he could already sense unfolding. The next morning, as he boarded the train at Victoria Station, Poirot felt a familiar thrill. The platform buzzed with travellers, their faces a mix of anticipation and weariness. He settled into a first-class compartment, his eyes scanning the other passengers, a habit born of years observing human nature. A young woman with a nervous smile clutched a basket of dyed eggs, likely a gift for a host. An elderly man read a newspaper, its headline proclaiming a rise in inheritance. Disputes. Poirot's lips twitched. Coincidence, perhaps, but he filed it away. The train whistle sounded, and the carriage lurched forward, carrying him toward Ashford-on-Sea and the enigma of Blackwood Manor. He leaned back, his hands folded neatly over his cane, and allowed his mind to wander. What did Sir Reginald fear? A theft, a betrayal, or something darker, cloaked in the guise of Easter's promise? Poirot's intuition, honed by countless cases, whispered that this weekend would be anything but ordinary. As the city gave way to rolling fields, Poirot closed his eyes. Envisioning the manor's grand halls, the clink of crystal at dinner, the guarded glances of a family bound by blood and secrets. He would watch, listen, and, as always, uncover the truth hidden beneath the surface. The Easter Sunday mystery, whatever it was, had begun. Chapter 2. Arrival at the Manor. The train to Ashford-on-Sea swayed gently through the Sussex countryside, its rhythmic clatter a soothing backdrop to Hercule Poirot's thoughts. The fields outside the window bloomed with the tender green of spring, dotted with lambs and the occasional burst of wildflowers. Poirot, seated in his first-class compartment, adjusted his gloves and glanced at his pocket watch. It was Good Friday mid-afternoon, and Blackwood Manor was less than an hour away. The invitation from Sir Reginald Hargrove weighed on his mind, its polite words masking an undercurrent of purpose he had yet to decipher. He sensed the stage was being set, and he, Hercule Poirot, was to play a pivotal role. As the train slowed, pulling into the quaint station of Ashford-on-Sea, Poirot gathered his valise and stepped onto the platform. The air carried the briny tang of the nearby coast, mingling with the scent of budding hawthorn. A driver, a wiry man in a dark uniform, stood waiting beside a polished Rolls-Royce. "Monsieur Poirot?" he asked, tipping his cap. "I'm Jenkins, sir, from Blackwood Manor. Sir Reginald sent me to fetch you." Poirot nodded, noting the man's guarded eyes and the faint tremor in his hands. Nervousness, perhaps, or something more. He filed the observation away. The drive to the manor wound through narrow lanes, past hedgerows and stone walls. Jenkins was not talkative, answering Poirot's polite inquiries with brevity. "The manor's grand, sir. Been in the family for generations. Easter's a big to-do this year." His tone was clipped, as if he feared saying too much. Poirot smiled beneath his moustache. Silence, he knew, often spoke louder than words. Blackwood Manor came into view as they crested a hill, its Georgian facade glowing in the late afternoon light. Ivy clung to its stone walls, and tall windows reflected the sinking sun. The grounds were immaculate, with manicured lawns and a fountain shaped like a leaping hare, the same motif as the crest on Sir Reginald's letter. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Symbols, he mused, were rarely accidental. At the manor's entrance, a heavy oak door swung open, revealing Mrs. Evelyn Crane, the housekeeper. She was a woman of middle age, her grey hair pulled into a tight bun, her demeanour brisk yet warm. "Monsieur Poirot, welcome," she said, her voice betraying a faint northern accent. "Sir Reginald is in the drawing-room with the family. I'll show you to your room first, if you please." Poirot inclined his head, noting her efficient movements and the way her eyes darted toward the staircase, as if expecting someone to appear. The interior of Blackwood Manor was as grand as its exterior promised. Polished marble floors gleamed under chandeliers, and portraits of stern-faced Hargroves lined the walls. Easter decorations adorned the space, garlands of spring flowers, baskets of dyed eggs in vibrant hues, and a silver cross on a sideboard, a nod to the solemnity of Good Friday. Yet the air felt heavy, as if the manor itself held its breath. Poirot's room was on the second floor, a spacious chamber with a four-poster bed and a view of the gardens. Mrs. Crane lingered a moment longer than necessary, adjusting a vase of lilies. "It's a full house this weekend," she said almost to herself. "The family, the vicar, Miss Clara's nurse, and now you." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "A nurse, you say? For Mademoiselle Clara?" Mrs. Crane's lips tightened. "Yes, sir. She's delicate, poor thing. Keeps to herself mostly." She excused herself swiftly, leaving Poirot to unpack and ponder the household's dynamics. At 6 o'clock, Poirot descended to the drawing-room, his patent leather shoes gleaming. The room was a study in opulence. Velvet drapes, a roaring fire, and a long table set with crystal decanters. Sir Reginald Hargrove stood at the centre, a tall man with silver hair and a commanding presence, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Monsieur Poirot!" he boomed, striding forward to shake his hand. "An honour to have you here. Come, meet the family." Introductions followed, each guest a piece in the puzzle Poirot was already assembling. Edward Hargrove, the eldest son, was a handsome man in his late 30s, his tailored suit unable to mask a restless energy. His handshake was firm, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Heard you're quite the sleuth," he said, a hint of challenge in his tone. Beatrice, the daughter, was a striking woman with auburn hair, her French accent faint but noticeable. She wore widow's black, though her husband's death was years past, and her gaze lingered on Poirot, assessing him. Clara, the youngest, sat by the fire, a shawl draped over her frail shoulders. Her nurse, Miss Lydia Gray, hovered nearby, her expression unreadable. Clara's pale eyes met Poirot's briefly, sharp with intelligence despite her delicate frame. Others joined the gathering. Reverend Thomas Vale, a local vicar with a scholarly air and a habit of quoting scripture, and Lionel Hargrove, a distant cousin whose flashy tie and sly grin suggested a man accustomed to living on charm. The staff, too, made brief appearances, Mrs. Crane, overseeing the maids, and Jenkins, now doubling as a footman, his earlier nervousness replaced by a practiced deference. Conversation flowed over aperitifs, but Poirot sensed undercurrents. Edward spoke loudly of his political aspirations, though Sir Reginald's responses were curt. Beatrice deflected questions about her time in Paris, her fingers tightening around her glass. Clara said little, but her gaze darted between her siblings, as if weighing their words. Reverend Vale mentioned the Easter service planned for Sunday, his tone oddly insistent, while Lionel made jests that earned uneasy laughter. Sir Reginald, for his part, played the gracious host, yet Poirot noticed him glance toward the door more than once, as if expecting an uninvited guest. Dinner was announced, and the party moved to the dining room, where a long table gleamed with silver and candlelight. The meal was lavish: roast lamb, spring peas, and a pudding flavoured with saffron. But the mood was strained. Edward argued with his father over investments, Beatrice murmured cryptic remarks about family loyalty, and Clara's soft cough interrupted a tense silence. Poirot, seated beside Sir Reginald, listened more than he spoke, his keen eyes noting every gesture. Lionel's furtive glance at Beatrice, the vicar's clenched jaw, Mrs. Crane's hesitation as she served the wine. As the meal ended, Sir Reginald raised a toast to Easter, his voice hearty, but his eyes troubled. "To renewal," he said, "and to truths revealed." The words hung in the air, and Poirot's moustache twitched. Truths, he thought, were precisely what he had come to uncover. The evening ended with the guests dispersing, some to the library, others to their rooms, but Poirot lingered, his mind alive with questions. Why had Sir Reginald invited him? What shadow hung over this festive gathering? Returning to his room, Poirot paused at a window overlooking the gardens. In the moonlight, the hair fountain seemed to watch him, its stone eyes glinting. He thought of the Easter egg baskets, the cross, the nervous glances. "The little grey cells," he murmured, "they are already at work." Tomorrow, Holy Saturday, would bring new clues, and Poirot would be ready. Chapter 3. The Shadow of Good Friday. The morning of Good Friday had dawned grey and sombre at Blackwood Manor, the sky heavy with clouds that mirrored the undercurrent of unease among its inhabitants. Hercule Poirot, ever an early riser, stood at his bedroom window, his sharp eyes scanning the mist-shrouded gardens below. The hair fountain, barely visible through the fog, seemed to crouch in vigilance, its stone form a silent witness to the secrets of the estate. Poirot's moustache twitched as he contemplated the previous evening's dinner. The guarded glances, the sharp words, the unspoken tensions that clung to the Hargrove family like damp air. Something was amiss, and he intended to uncover it. Breakfast was served in a smaller dining room, its walls adorned with sombre religious paintings that suited the solemnity of Good Friday. The table was set with restraint, fresh bread, butter, and a modest selection of jams, a nod to the day's penitential tone. Poirot, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit, joined the family, noting who was present and who was not. Sir Reginald presided at the head, his face etched with fatigue, as if sleep had eluded him. Edward, the eldest son, read a newspaper with forced nonchalance, while Beatrice sipped tea, her eyes distant. Clara, pale and silent, sat beside her nurse, Miss Lydia Gray, whose attentive demeanour seemed almost proprietary. Reverend Vale was there, his fingers tracing the edge of a prayer book, while Lionel Hargrove, the cousin, arrived late, his joviality at odds with the mood. Mrs. Evelyn Crane, the housekeeper, supervised the meal with her usual efficiency, but Poirot noticed her pause when Edward asked for more coffee, her hand lingering on the pot as if distracted. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Crane?" Poirot asked, his voice soft but probing. She started, her eyes meeting his briefly before she murmured, "Quite all right, sir. Just a busy day ahead." Poirot smiled politely, but his mind catalogued her unease. The little details, he thought, they always betray the truth. The conversation was subdued, punctuated by Reverend Vale's remarks about the Good Friday service at the village church. "A time for reflection," he said, his voice resonant, "to contemplate sacrifice and redemption." Sir Reginald nodded, but his gaze drifted to the window, where rain had begun to patter against the panes. Beatrice set her cup down sharply, drawing eyes. "Must we be so dreary?" she asked, her tone brittle. "It's only a holiday." Edward snorted, and Clara's cough broke the silence that followed. Poirot observed, saying little, his mind piecing together the family's dynamics. Sacrifice and redemption, indeed, words that carried weight in a house brimming with secrets. After breakfast, Poirot wandered the manor's halls, his cane tapping lightly on the polished floors. The Easter decorations, so vibrant the night before, seemed subdued in the grey light. Baskets of dyed eggs, their colours muted, and wreaths of ivy that now appeared more funereal than festive. In the library, he found Sir Reginald examining a small ornate box, a family heirloom, perhaps, encrusted with enamel and shaped like an egg. "A curious piece," Poirot remarked, approaching. Sir Reginald started, nearly dropping it. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, yes, it's an old thing, belonged to my late wife." His voice was strained, and he quickly locked the box in a drawer. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The box, he noted, was not where it belonged, a detail Sir Reginald had not intended him to see. The day unfolded, with a rhythm dictated by tradition. The household prepared for the church service, though not all would attend. Clara, citing her health, remained behind with Miss Grey, while Lionel declared he'd rather take a walk than sit through sermons. Poirot, however, joined the party heading to the village, curious to observe the family in a public setting. The church, a stone edifice with a weathered spire, was filled with villagers and the faint scent of incense. Reverend Vale delivered a sermon on betrayal and forgiveness, his eyes lingering on the Hargrove pew. Poirot, seated beside Beatrice, noted her clenched hands and the way Edward's jaw tightened at certain passages. Sir Reginald, meanwhile, seemed distracted, his gaze fixed on a stained-glass window depicting the crucifixion. Returning to the manor, Poirot's suspicions deepened when he overheard a hushed argument in the garden. Hidden behind a yew hedge, Edward and Lionel stood close, their voices low but heated. "You've gone too far this time," Edward hissed. "If father finds out—" Lionel cut him off with a laugh. "He won't, not unless you're fool enough to tell him." Poirot, unseen, made a mental note. What had Lionel done, and why did Edward fear its discovery? The little grey cells, as Poirot liked to call them, were already weaving connections. Back inside, the afternoon brought a peculiar discovery. In the drawing room, Poirot noticed a folded note tucked beneath a vase of lilies. It was written in a hurried scrawl. "The truth will rise by Sunday. Beware the hare." The words were cryptic, the handwriting unidentifiable, but the reference to the hare, the manor's crest, intrigued him. He pocketed the note, intending to study it later. Was it a warning? A threat? And for whom was it intended? The manor's atmosphere grew heavier, as if the weight of Good Friday's solemnity had seeped into its walls. Dinner that evening was a tense affair. The menu was simple, fish in keeping with the day's abstinence, but the conversation was anything but. Edward's mood was sour, his remarks to Lionel barbed. Beatrice spoke of her time in Paris with unusual candour, hinting at a betrayal that had driven her back to England. Clara, though quiet, watched her siblings with an intensity that belied her frailty. Sir Reginald attempted to steer the talk to Easter plans, an egg hunt, a feast, but his efforts faltered. Poirot, ever observant, noted Mrs. Crane's hesitation as she served, and Jenkins, the driver-turned-footman, nearly dropped a platter when Lionel made a jest about family skeletons. As the meal ended, Sir Reginald excused himself early, citing a headache. Poirot watched him go, noting the slump in his shoulders. The others lingered, but the mood was fractured. Reverend Vale spoke of the Easter vigil planned for tomorrow, his voice oddly insistent, while Beatrice retired to her room, claiming fatigue. Poirot, however, remained in the drawing-room, sipping a small glass of cognac and reviewing the day's observations. The misplaced heirloom, the cryptic note, the overheard argument, all were threads in a tapestry he was only beginning to discern. Before retiring, Poirot took a final turn through the manor's halls. In a quiet corridor, he found Clara, alone, staring at a portrait of her late mother. She loved Easter, Clara said softly, sensing his presence. She said it was a time for new beginnings. Poirot nodded, his eyes gentle but probing. "And you, mademoiselle, what do you seek this Easter?" Clara's smile was faint, almost secretive. "Peace, perhaps," she said before turning away. In his room, Poirot sat at a small desk, the anonymous note before him. The shadow of Good Friday had cast its pall over Blackwood Manor, and he sensed the mystery deepening. Tomorrow, Holy Saturday, would bring new revelations, and Poirot would be ready, his little grey cells alert to every whisper of truth. Chapter 4. The Easter Vigil. The morning of Holy Saturday broke with a tentative sun, its rays piercing the mist that clung to Blackwood Manor's grounds. Hercule Poirot stood at his window, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes tracing the garden's paths, where dew sparkled like scattered diamonds. The air held the promise of Easter's renewal, yet the manor seemed to pulse with an unspoken tension, as if the house itself anticipated the unravelling of its secrets. Last night's discoveries, the cryptic note, the misplaced heirloom, the overheard argument between Edward and Lionel, had set Poirot's little grey cells alight. Today, he resolved, would bring clarity to the shadows cast by Good Friday. Breakfast was a subdued affair, served in the same intimate dining room as the previous day. The table bore traces of Easter preparations. A basket of unpainted eggs awaited dyeing, and a tray of hot cross buns, their spiced scent mingling with the aroma of coffee, added a festive touch. Sir Reginald, looking more rested, presided with forced cheer, announcing plans for the day. A traditional egg-dyeing session, followed by preparations for tomorrow's Easter hunt. Edward, however, was absent, his chair empty, which drew a frown from his father. Beatrice, her auburn hair pinned elegantly, sipped her tea in silence, while Clara, pale but alert, sat beside Miss Lydia Gray, whose watchful eyes rarely left her charge. Reverend Vale, ever present, spoke of the Easter Vigil service that evening, his voice heavy with solemnity. Lionel, true to form, made light of the occasion. Earning a sharp glance from Mrs. Crane, the housekeeper, Poirot, seated near Sir Reginald, observed the dynamics with keen interest. "Monsieur Edward, he is indisposed?" he inquired politely. Sir Reginald's jaw tightened. "Late night in the village, no doubt," he said curtly. "He'll turn up." Beatrice's lips twitched, as if suppressing a comment, while Clara's fingers paused on her teacup. Poirot noted their reactions, sensing Edward's absence was more significant than a mere late morning. The egg-dyeing session took place in the conservatory, a glass-walled haven filled with blooming azaleas and the hum of spring warmth. Tables were set with bowls of vibrant dyes, crimson, indigo, saffron, and brushes for intricate designs. The family, joined by the vicar and Lionel, gathered reluctantly, their attempts at festivity strained. Poirot, ever the observer, participated with precision, painting a single egg with a geometric pattern that mirrored his love of order. As he worked, he listened. Beatrice and Lionel exchanged barbed remarks about family traditions, their voices low but sharp. Clara, guided by Miss Grey, painted slowly, her egg adorned with a delicate hair motif that echoed the manor's crest. Reverend Vale, meanwhile, spoke of the vigil's symbolism, light overcoming darkness, his words directed at Sir Reginald, who nodded absently. It was during this activity that Poirot noticed a discrepancy. A silver egg, part of a decorative set displayed on a sideboard, was missing. He recalled seeing it yesterday, its intricate filigree catching the light. Now, its absence left an uneven gap among its companions. He approached Mrs. Crane, who was replenishing dye bowls. "Madame, the silver egg, it is misplaced," he asked, his tone casual. Her eyes flickered with unease. "It must be in the drawing-room, sir. I'll check later." Her haste to change the subject was telling, and Poirot filed it away with the other clues, the anonymous note, the heirloom box, Edward's absence. Midday brought a walk through the grounds, ostensibly to plan the Easter egg hunt's layout. Sir Reginald led the group, pointing out hiding spots among the rose bushes and beneath the ancient oaks. Poirot, however, lingered near the hair fountain, its stone eyes seeming to follow him. There, he overheard another fragment of conversation, this time between Miss Grey and Clara, who had paused by a garden bench. "You mustn't worry," Miss Grey whispered, her tone urgent. "It's all arranged." Clara's response was inaudible, but her expression was one of resolve. Poirot's moustache twitched. Arranged? What scheme was afoot, and how did it connect to the manor's growing web of secrets? The afternoon passed with preparations for the Easter Vigil, a service to be held in the manor's private chapel, a small stone building adjacent to the house. Poirot used the time to explore, his cane tapping softly as he navigated the manor's corridors. In a rarely used study, he found a ledger half hidden beneath a pile of papers. It detailed recent changes to Sir Reginald's will, with significant portions allocated to Edward, Beatrice, and a mysterious trust labelled for C. Clara, perhaps, or another beneficiary. The document was unsigned, suggesting it was a draft, but its implications were clear. Inheritance was a motive simmering beneath the surface. The vigil service, held at dusk, cast a solemn pall over the household. The chapel's stained-glass windows glowed faintly, depicting scenes of resurrection and sacrifice. Reverend Vale led the ceremony, his voice resonant as he spoke of renewal and the triumph of light. The family sat in the front pew, their faces illuminated by candlelight. Edward had reappeared, his expression sullen, his tie slightly askew. Poirot, seated at the back, watched closely. Beatrice's hands were clasped tightly, her knuckles white. Clara's cough punctuated the silence, drawing a concerned glance from Miss Grey. Sir Reginald's eyes were fixed on the altar, but his fingers drummed restlessly on the pew. Lionel, fidgeting, seemed out of place, his usual levity subdued. After the service, as the group returned to the manor, Poirot lingered in the chapel, examining the hymnals. Tucked inside one, he found another note, its handwriting matching the previous day's. "The hare sees all. Tomorrow brings judgment." The reference to Easter Sunday was unmistakable, and Poirot's pulse quickened. Was this a warning of impending danger, or a taunt from someone playing a deeper game? He pocketed the note, determined to cross-reference it with the first. Dinner was a quiet affair, the family subdued by the vigil's weight. Sir Reginald spoke little, his earlier cheer replaced by a distracted air. Edward drank more wine than necessary, his comments to Lionel sharp and accusatory. Beatrice excused herself early, claiming a headache, while Clara retired with Miss Grey, her frailty more pronounced. Poirot, ever observant, noted Mrs. Crane's nervous glances toward the door and Jenkins' hurried movements as he cleared the table. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the manor awaited a storm. Before retiring, Poirot took a final turn through the gardens, the moon casting long shadows across the lawn. The hare fountain loomed in the darkness, its presence almost accusatory. He thought of the missing silver egg, the unsigned will, the cryptic notes. Each was a piece of the puzzle, and tomorrow, Easter Sunday, promised to bring them into focus. As he returned to his room, he paused at a window, catching sight of a figure moving swiftly across the grounds. Edward? Lionel? Or someone else entirely? The little grey cells hummed with activity, sensing the mystery's threads tightening. In his room, Poirot sat at the desk, the two notes before him. The hare, the will, the vigil's themes of light and darkness, all pointed to a truth poised to emerge. He closed his eyes, letting the clues settle in his mind. Tomorrow, he knew, would be a day of revelation, and Hercule Poirot would be ready to meet it. Chapter 5. The Dawn of Easter Sunday. The first light of Easter Sunday crept over the Sussex hills, bathing Blackwood Manor in a golden glow that promised renewal, but delivered instead a chilling discovery. Hercule Poirot, awakened by the faint tolling of the village church bell, stood at his window, his eyes tracing the mist that lingered in the garden below. The hare fountain, its stone form softened by dawn's light, seemed to watch the manor with an air of quiet menace. The events of the past 2 days, the cryptic notes, the missing silver egg, the unsigned will, the overheard arguments, had woven a tapestry of suspicion in Poirot's mind. His little grey cells were restless, sensing that the mystery was about to break open. He dressed with his usual precision, choosing a suit of soft grey to honour the solemnity of the day, and descended to the dining room for an early breakfast. The household was quiet, the festive preparations for Easter Sunday overshadowed by an unspoken tension. Only Mrs. Evelyn Crane, the housekeeper, was present, arranging a tray of pastries and a pot of tea. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured, and Poirot's keen eyes noted her pallor. "A fine morning, Madame Crane," he said, his voice gentle but probing. "Yet you seem preoccupied." She managed a tight smile. "Just the bustle of the day, sir. Easter's always a grand affair here." Her words were unconvincing, and Poirot filed her unease alongside the other clues. The peace was shattered moments later by a piercing scream from the garden. Poirot, his cane in hand, moved swiftly towards the sound, joined by Jenkins the driver, who had appeared from the servants' quarters. They emerged onto the lawn to find Beatrice, her face ashen, standing near the hare fountain. At her feet lay Sir Reginald Hargrove, his body sprawled in the dew-soaked grass, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. A shattered Easter egg, its crimson shell fragmented, lay beside him, its contents seeping into the earth. Beatrice's voice trembled as she whispered, I found him like this. He was out for his morning walk." Poirot knelt beside the body, his movements precise despite the urgency of the moment. Sir Reginald's face was contorted, a faint froth at his lips suggesting poison or a sudden seizure. His hands clutched a small embroidered handkerchief, its edge torn. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he examined the scene. The egg deliberately placed bore traces of gold paint, unlike the dyed eggs from yesterday's session. The ground showed no signs of a struggle, yet a single footprint, partially obscured by Beatrice's own, hinted at another's presence. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, "this is no accident. It is murder." The household converged on the scene, drawn by Beatrice's cry. Edward arrived, his face pale but his eyes darting as if calculating. Clara, supported by Miss Lydia Gray, gasped and turned away, her frailty stark against the morning light. Lionel, dishevelled, muttered a curse, while Reverend Vale clasped his prayer book, his lips moving in silent prayer. Mrs. Crane stood frozen, her hands twisting her apron, and Jenkins lingered at the edge, his expression unreadable. Poirot, rising, addressed them with calm authority. "No one is to touch the body or the egg. We must preserve the scene until the authorities arrive." He sent Jenkins to telephone the local police, though he knew the village constable would be out of his depth. Poirot's mind was already at work, piecing together the clues. The shattered egg, symbolic of Easter's resurrection, was no coincidence. It was a message, perhaps from the same hand that penned the cryptic notes. The handkerchief, with its torn edge, suggested a struggle or a clue left behind. And Beatrice's presence at the scene, was she truly the innocent discoverer? Or had she been drawn to the garden for a reason? As the household retreated to the drawing-room, Poirot remained by the body, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The hair fountain, its stone eyes glinting, seemed to mock his efforts. He noticed a faint scratch on its base, fresh and deliberate, as if someone had scraped it recently. A tool, perhaps? Or another clue? He made a mental note to investigate further. Inside, the atmosphere was one of shock and suspicion. Edward paced, his voice sharp as he demanded answers. Who would do this? Father had enemies, but this is madness. Beatrice, seated by the fire, stared into the flames, her hands trembling. Clara, wrapped in a shawl, whispered to Miss Gray, who nodded curtly. Lionel poured himself a brandy, despite the early hour, his usual levity replaced by a grim silence. Reverend Vale offered platitudes about eternal life, but his eyes flicked nervously toward the window. Poirot, standing at the room's centre, observed them all, his mind cataloguing their reactions. Grief, fear, guilt, each face told a story, and he intended to read them all. He began with gentle questions, his tone soothing yet incisive. "Mademoiselle Beatrice, you were walking early. Did you see anyone else in the garden?" Beatrice hesitated, her eyes meeting his briefly. "No, no one. I couldn't sleep, so I went out. I found him near the fountain." Her voice wavered, and Poirot noted the slight tremor in her hands. Edward, interjecting, claimed he'd been in his room all morning, a claim Mrs. Crane confirmed, though her hesitation suggested doubt. Clara, too weak to speak at length, said she'd been asleep, with Miss Gray corroborating her alibi. Lionel admitted to a late night in the village, returning at dawn, while Reverend Vale claimed he'd been preparing his Easter sermon in the chapel. Poirot's questions were interrupted by the arrival of Constable Harris, a stout man with a flustered air. He took one look at Sir Reginald's body and declared it a heart attack, but Poirot's firm intervention corrected him. "No, monsieur. The froth of the lips, the egg, the footprint, these are not the signs of a natural death. You will summon a doctor and a detective from London." Harris, cowed by Poirot's authority, complied, promising a coroner by way hunt midday. As the morning progressed, Poirot returned to the garden, examining the scene with meticulous care. The footprint, he determined, belonged to a man's shoe, its size suggesting someone taller than Jenkins, but shorter than Edward. The egg's gold paint was fresh, likely applied last night, and its contents, a faint chemical smell, hinted at poison. The handkerchief, embroidered with the initial H, could belong to any Hargrove, but its torn edge suggested it had been caught on something, or someone. Poirot's mind raced, connecting the clues to the notes about the hair and the unsigned will. Was Sir Reginald's death tied to the inheritance, or was there a deeper motive? Back in the manor, whispers of suspicion began to spread. Edward accused Lionel of knowing more than he let on, while Beatrice's guarded silence drew curious glances. Clara, though frail, watched the others with a keenness that belied her condition. Poirot, sensing the household's unravelling, resolved to act swiftly. He requested a private room to begin formal interviews, determined to unravel the web of alibis and motives before the day ended. As noon approached, the church bells rang out, proclaiming Easter's triumph. Yet, at Blackwood Manor, the promise of resurrection was overshadowed by death. Poirot, standing by the fountain, felt the weight of the mystery deepen. The hair, the egg, the handkerchief, all were pieces of a puzzle that would soon reveal a killer. With his little grey cells in full motion, he prepared to confront the truth, knowing that Easter Sunday would be a day of reckoning. Chapter 6. Interrogations in the Drawing Room. The morning of Easter Sunday at Blackwood Manor was cloaked in a pall of shock and suspicion, the joyous peal of church bells a stark contrast to the grim reality of Sir Reginald Hargrove's murder. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing-room, its heavy velvet curtains drawn to mute the sunlight, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The air was thick with tension, the scent of lilies from yesterday's decorations now mingling with the faint tang of fear. Sir Reginald's body, still lying in the garden under a constable's watch, awaited the coroner's arrival, but Poirot knew time was of the essence. The killer was among them, and he intended to unravel their secrets before they could weave new lies. He had requested the household gather in the drawing-room, a space both grand and oppressive, with its dark wood panelling and ancestral portraits. The family and their circle sat in a semicircle of armchairs and sofas. Edward, his face taut with suppressed anger. Beatrice, her auburn hair pinned tightly, her eyes avoiding contact. Clara, frail but alert, clutching a shawl beside Miss Lydia Gray, whose expression was unreadable. Lionel, the cousin, slouched with a forced nonchalance, and Reverend Vale, his prayer book closed, but his fingers restless. Mrs. Evelyn Crane stood near the door, her hands clasped, while Jenkins, the driver, lingered at the edge, his earlier nervousness replaced by a wary silence. Constable Harris, out of his depth, hovered by the fireplace, deferring to Poirot's authority. "Monsieur et Madame," Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding, "a tragedy has befallen this house. Sir Reginald Hargrove has been murdered, and the truth it hides among us. I will ask questions and I expect answers, truthful ones. The little grey cells, they do not tolerate deception." His green eyes swept the room, noting each reaction. Edward's clenched jaw, Beatrice's slight flinch, Clara's steady gaze. He began with Beatrice, who had discovered the body. "Mademoiselle, you were in the garden at dawn. Why so early, and what precisely did you see?" Beatrice's fingers tightened on her handkerchief. "I couldn't sleep," she said, her voice low. "The house felt stifling. I went for a walk and found father by the fountain. He was already dead." Her eyes flickered to Edward, then away. Poirot pressed gently. "And no one else was there? No sound, no movement?" She shook her head, but her hesitation was a crack in her composure. Edward was next, his alibi already stated but now scrutinized. "You were in your room all morning, oui?" Yet Mrs. Crane seemed uncertain when she confirmed this. Edward's eyes narrowed. "I was asleep. I had a late night. Business in the village." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Business? On Good Friday? With whom?" Edward faltered, muttering about a friend at the pub, but his vagueness drew a murmur from Lionel, who quickly stifled it. Clara, questioned next, spoke softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was asleep, Monsieur Poirot. Lydia can confirm." Miss Grey nodded curtly. "Miss Clara was in her room all night. I checked on her at midnight and again at 6. Poirot noted the nurse's precise timing. Too precise, perhaps. He turned to Lionel, whose casual demeanour belied a nervous twitch in his fingers. "You, Monsieur Hargrove, returned at dawn from the village. Where were you and with whom?" Lionel grinned, though it lacked conviction. "Just a bit of fun at the Red Lion. Ask anyone there." Poirot made a mental note to verify this, sensing Lionel's bravado masked something deeper. Reverend Vale claimed he was in the chapel, preparing his Easter sermon, a solitary task no one could confirm. Mrs. Crane admitted to being in the kitchen from 5 o'clock, overseeing breakfast preparations, while Jenkins said he was in the servants' quarters, though his eyes darted to Mrs. Crane as he spoke. Each alibi was plausible, yet Poirot sensed gaps, moments unaccounted for, glances that betrayed unease. As the interrogations continued, Poirot revealed a key observation: the shattered egg beside Sir Reginald's body, its gold paint and chemical smell suggesting poison. This egg, he said, holding up a sketch he'd made of it, was not from the dying session. It was placed deliberately, a symbol, perhaps, of betrayal. The room stirred. Beatrice gasped, Edward's face darkened, and Clara's eyes widened. Poirot pressed on, mentioning the handkerchief with the initial H. It could belong to any Hargrove, or none, but its torn edge suggests it was caught, perhaps in a struggle. He watched their faces, noting Lionel's sudden stillness and Miss Grey's tightened lips. The questioning turned to motives. Poirot had learned of the unsigned will, found in the study, which redistributed Sir Reginald's fortune. "Monsieur Edward, you stood to gain significantly. Yet you argued with your father about money, no?" Edward bristled. "Every family has disagreements. I didn't need his money, I have my own prospects." Beatrice, when questioned, admitted to resenting her father's control over her inheritance, her time in Paris having left her financially strained. Clara, surprisingly candid, spoke of her father's promise to fund a sanatorium stay, a plan now in jeopardy. Lionel laughed off questions about money, claiming he lived on charm and good fortune. But his eyes betrayed a flicker of desperation. Reverend Vale, when pressed, admitted to advising Sir Reginald on charitable bequests, though he was evasive about specifics. Mrs. Crane and Jenkins, as staff, denied any stake in the will, but Poirot noted their loyalty to Sir Reginald and their knowledge of the family's secrets. "The household," he said, "is a web of loyalties and grudges. Someone here knows more than they say." A new clue emerged during a break, when Poirot examined the drawing-room sideboard. A small vial, hidden behind a candelabra, contained traces of a clear liquid, possibly the poison used in the egg. Its discovery sent a ripple through the group, with Edward accusing Lionel of tampering with the Easter preparations, and Beatrice suggesting the staff might have access to such substances. Poirot silenced them, his voice sharp. "Accusations without evidence are noise, not truth. We seek facts." As noon approached, the coroner arrived, confirming Poirot's suspicion of poison, likely administered hours before death. The footprint near the body was identified as a man's size 10, ruling out Jenkins but not Edward or Lionel. The handkerchief's tear matched a thorn on a rosebush near the fountain, suggesting it had been caught there. Poirot's mind raced, connecting the vial, the egg, the notes about the hair, and the will. The killer had planned carefully, using Easter's symbolism to mask their intent. The interrogations ended with no confessions, but Poirot sensed the truth drawing closer. The family dispersed, their alibis shaky, their motives tangled. He lingered in the drawing-room, studying the portraits. Sir Reginald's stern face, his late wife's gentle smile. The hair crest, repeated in the room's decor, seemed to watch him. A reminder of the notes, warnings. "The truth will rise," he murmured, his little grey cells weaving the clues into a pattern. Easter Sunday was far from over, and Poirot knew the next hours would bring the killer's mask closer to falling. Chapter 7. Secrets Unearthed. The afternoon sun of Easter Sunday cast long shadows across Blackwood Manor, its golden light failing to dispel the chill of Sir Reginald Hargrove's murder. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing-room, his hands clasped behind his back, his green eyes scanning the assembled household. The morning's interrogations had cracked the surface of their alibis, revealing fissures of motive and deceit, but the killer remained elusive. The shattered egg, the poisoned vial, the torn handkerchief, and the cryptic notes about the hair swirled in Poirot's mind, each a thread in a tapestry of betrayal. His little grey cells hummed with purpose, determined to unearth the truth before the day ended. The household was restless, the festive promise of Easter overshadowed by suspicion. Edward paced by the fireplace, his earlier bravado replaced by a nervous energy. Beatrice sat rigidly, her auburn hair catching the light, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting an intrusion. Clara, wrapped in a shawl, sat beside Miss Lydia Gray, whose protective demeanour seemed to border on possessiveness. Lionel, the cousin, sipped a glass of sherry, his usual charm strained, while Reverend Vale clutched his prayer book, his scholarly air tinged with unease. Mrs. Evelyn Crane and Jenkins, the driver, hovered at the room's edges, their faces betraying the weight of their own secrets. Poirot had requested privacy to conduct individual interviews, and he began in the library, a room lined with leather-bound volumes and heavy with the scent of old paper. His first subject was Mrs. Crane, whose nervous demeanour during breakfast and the interrogations had caught his attention. Seated across from him, she twisted her apron, her eyes avoiding his. "Madame Crane," Poirot said, his voice gentle but firm, "you have served the Hargroves for many years, oui? You know their secrets." She hesitated, then nodded. "I've been here 20 years, sir. Seen a lot, but I keep my place." Poirot leaned forward. And what have you seen lately? Something about Sir Reginald, perhaps? Or the family's disputes?" Her lips tightened, but under his steady gaze she relented. "There's been talk of the will, sir. Sir Reginald was changing it, and not everyone was happy. Edward argued with him last week, loudly." This confirmed Poirot's suspicions about the unsigned will he'd found, but Mrs. Crane's next revelation was unexpected. "And there's a diary," she whispered, glancing at the door. "Miss Clara keeps one, locked in her room. I saw her writing in it late at night, before the vigil." Poirot's moustache twitched. A diary could hold the key to Clara's guarded thoughts, or her secrets. He dismissed Mrs. Crane, with thanks, his mind already planning his next move. Edward was next, his agitation palpable as he entered the library. "This is absurd," he snapped, pacing. "I didn't kill my father." Poirot raised a hand, his tone calm. "No one accuses you, monsieur, yet, but your absence this morning, and your argument with Sir Reginald, these require explanation." Edward's eyes flashed. "I was in the village, as I said. And yes, we argued. About money, investments, my future. He thought I was reckless, but I'd never harm him." Poirot noted the tremor in his voice, the way his hands clenched. "And this business in the village?" he pressed. Edward hesitated, then muttered, "A personal matter. Nothing to do with this." His evasiveness was a red flag, and Poirot resolved to investigate his whereabouts further. Beatrice followed, her composure brittle as she sat, her black dress stark against the library's warmth. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began, "your discovery of the body, was it truly by chance?" Her eyes met his, sharp with defiance. "I told you, I couldn't sleep. I walked and found him." Poirot leaned forward. "And your resentment of your father's control over your inheritance, did it ever turn to anger?" Beatrice's lips parted, then closed. "He was difficult," she admitted. "After Paris, he held my allowance tightly, as if I were a child, but I didn't kill him." Her voice cracked, and Poirot sensed truth mixed with omission. What had happened in Paris, and how did it connect to the manor's secrets? Clara, accompanied by Miss Grey, was a delicate presence, her pale eyes sharp despite her frailty. Poirot addressed her gently, aware of her health. "Mademoiselle Clara, your diary, Mrs. Crane mentioned it. May I see it?" Clara's face paled further, and Miss Grey interjected, "It's private, monsieur. She's not well." Poirot's gaze was unyielding. Privacy, in a murder, is a luxury we cannot afford. Clara, after a moment, nodded. "It's in my room. Lydia can fetch it." Miss Grey hesitated, then left, returning with a small, leather-bound book. Poirot flipped through it, finding entries about her father's plans for her treatment abroad, her siblings' tensions, and a cryptic mention of the hare's secret. He pocketed the diary for further study, noting Clara's anxious expression. Lionel's interview was predictably evasive. "I was at the Red Lion," he insisted, grinning. "Ask the barmaid, Molly. She'll vouch for me." But his eyes darted to the window, and Poirot sensed he was hiding something. Reverend Vale, when questioned, spoke of Sir Reginald's recent interest in charitable bequests, but his vagueness about details raised Poirot's suspicions. Miss Grey, interviewed last, was defensive, insisting her only concern was Clara's health. Yet her precise knowledge of Clara's movements, and her reluctance to discuss the diary, suggested a deeper involvement. Poirot's search of the manor yielded another clue. In the kitchen, hidden behind a sack of flour, he found a box of chocolates intended for the Easter baskets. One piece, partially unwrapped, emitted a faint chemical odour, similar to the vial from the drawing room, Poison again. He secured the box, his mind racing. The chocolates, like the egg, pointed to premeditation. But who had access to both? The staff, the family, or an outsider? As evening approached, Poirot returned to the drawing room, where the household awaited news from the coroner. The air was thick with accusation. Edward glared at Lionel. Beatrice avoided Clara's gaze, and Reverend Vale's prayers seemed more performative than devout. Poirot addressed them, his voice steady. The poison was in the egg and likely in the chocolates. Someone here planned Sir Reginald's death with care, using Easter's symbols to mask their intent. But the truth, it will not remain hidden. A commotion interrupted him. Jenkins, entering with a tray, dropped it, the clatter echoing. His face was pale, and Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Monsieur Jenkins, you are nervous. Why?" Jenkins stammered. "It's nothing, sir. Just the shock." But Poirot sensed more. Had Jenkins seen something in the garden, or was he protecting someone? The coroner's preliminary report arrived, confirming poison, likely cyanide, fast-acting and administered hours before dawn. The footprint, the handkerchief, the notes, all pointed to a calculated act. Poirot's mind connected the clues, the will, favouring Edward, but with a mysterious trust. Clara's diary, hinting at a secret tied to the hair. The poisoned chocolates, meant for the baskets. The killer was weaving a narrative, but Poirot was closing in. As the household dispersed, Poirot lingered, studying the hair crest above the fireplace. The note's warnings, "The hair sees all," echoed in his mind. Tomorrow's egg hunt, he knew, would be more than a game. It would be a stage for the killer's next move, and Poirot would be watching, his little grey cells poised to unearth the final secrets. Chapter 8. The Egg Hunt Deception. The late morning of Easter Sunday at Blackwood Manor was steeped in a strange blend of festivity and foreboding. The sun climbed higher, casting dappled light through the ancient oaks. But the shadow of Sir Reginald Hargrove's murder hung heavy over the estate. Hercule Poirot stood in the garden, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the dew-soaked grass, his eyes fixed on the hair fountain. Its stone gaze seemed to mock the chaos unfolding around it, a silent sentinel amid the manor's secrets. The clues, the poisoned egg, the torn handkerchief, the cryptic notes, the unsigned will, and the tainted chocolates swirled in Poirot's mind, each a piece of a puzzle nearing completion. His little grey cells buzzed with anticipation, sensing the killer was poised to make their next move. Despite the tragedy, the household proceeded with the planned Easter egg hunt, a tradition Sir Reginald had cherished. Mrs. Evelyn Crane, her face drawn but resolute, oversaw the preparations, directing maids to scatter brightly dyed eggs across the grounds. The family gathered reluctantly near the terrace, their faces a mix of grief and suspicion. Edward, his jaw tight, stood apart, his eyes scanning the group. Beatrice, in a dark green dress that replaced her widow's black, fidgeted with a bracelet, her composure fraying. Clara, supported by Miss Lydia Gray, clutched a basket, her pale eyes sharp with unspoken thoughts. Lionel, attempting his usual levity, made a jest about finding the golden egg, but it fell flat. Reverend Vale, clutching his prayer book, spoke of the hunt as a symbol of resurrection, though his voice lacked conviction. Jenkins, the driver, hovered at the edge, his hands restless. Poirot, observing from the terrace, found the decision to proceed curious. "Madam Crane," he said softly, approaching the housekeeper, "is it not unusual to hold the hunt with Sir Reginald's body still in the garden?" She hesitated, her hands twisting her apron. It was his wish, sir. He loved the tradition, and he'd want it to go on. Her eyes darted to the fountain, and Poirot noted her unease. Was the hunt a distraction, or part of the killer's plan? As the hunt began, the participants spread across the lawn, their movements mechanical. Poirot, declining to join, watched closely, his cane tapping rhythmically. Clara moved slowly, Miss Grey guiding her to a bench where she examined a blue egg with a delicate hair motif. Edward, searching near the rose bushes, paused to glance at Lionel, who was rifling through a hedge with unusual intensity. Beatrice lingered near the fountain, her basket empty, her eyes fixed on the spot where Sir Reginald had been found. Reverend Vale, ostensibly supervising, seemed distracted, his gaze shifting to the manor's windows. Poirot's attention was drawn to a discovery near the oak grove. Lionel, with a triumphant grin, held up a golden egg, larger than the others, its surface gleaming. "Found the prize!" he called, drawing the others. But as he opened it, a folded note slipped out, its handwriting matching the previous cryptic messages. Poirot, moving swiftly, intercepted it before Lionel could conceal it. The note read, "The hare's judgment falls today. One will pay." The group fell silent, their eyes darting to one another. Poirot's moustache twitched. "This is no game," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "The killer plays with us, using Easter's symbols to taunt." The note's discovery shifted the mood. Edward accused Lionel of planting it, his voice sharp. "You're always scheming, cousin. What's your game?" Lionel's grin faded, his hands raised in protest. "I just found it. Why point fingers at me?" Beatrice, her voice trembling, suggested the notes were a prank, but her eyes betrayed fear. Clara, clutching her basket, whispered to Miss Grey, who shook her head firmly. Poirot, pocketing the note, announced he would examine it further, his mind racing. The golden egg, like the poisoned one, was no accident. It was a deliberate clue, meant to mislead or incriminate. As the hunt continued, Poirot slipped away to the fountain, where he noticed a fresh scratch on its base, deeper than the one he'd seen yesterday. Kneeling, he found a small concealed compartment in the stone, empty but bearing traces of gold paint. Had the golden egg been hidden here, or something else? A weapon, perhaps? His investigation was interrupted by a shout from the rose bushes. Jenkins, assisting with the hunt, had found a small dagger, its blade stained with a dried reddish substance. Poirot took it carefully, noting its ornate handle, engraved with the Hargrove crest. "This," he said, holding it aloft, "may be the key to our mystery, or a deception." The dagger's discovery sent ripples through the group. Edward claimed it was a family heirloom, kept in the study, while Beatrice insisted she'd never seen it. Clara's eyes widened, and Miss Grey's hand tightened on her arm. Lionel, uncharacteristically quiet, avoided Poirot's gaze. Reverend Vale murmured about instruments of sin, his words vague but ominous. Poirot, wrapping the dagger in his handkerchief, resolved to test it for poison, suspecting it was a red herring meant to divert attention. Returning to the manor, Poirot requested a private meeting with Constable Harris, who confirmed the coroner's report. Cyanide, administered via the egg's contents, had killed Sir Reginald. The dagger, Harris admitted, was unlikely to be the murder weapon, but its presence suggested someone was framing another. Poirot's mind connected the dots, the notes, the egg, the dagger, the will. The killer was orchestrating a narrative, using the hunt to plant false clues. But who stood to gain? Edward, with his inheritance at stake? Beatrice, nursing old grudges? Clara, whose diary hinted at secrets, or an outsider, like Lionel, or even Miss Grey? As the afternoon waned, Poirot gathered the household in the drawing-room, the golden egg and note on the table before him. "The killer," he said, his voice steady, "uses the egg hunt to deceive. This note, this dagger, they are meant to point us toward the innocent, to cloud the truth. But the little grey cells, they see through such tricks." He watched their reactions. Edward's clenched fists, Beatrice's averted gaze, Clara's steady stare, Lionel's forced smile. Miss Grey's hand rested on Clara's shoulder, a gesture both protective and possessive. Reverend Vale's prayers grew louder, as if to drown out his own thoughts. Poirot's questions grew sharper. "Monsieur Lionel, you found the golden egg too quickly. Did you know its location?" Lionel protested, claiming luck, but his eyes flickered. "Mademoiselle Clara, your diary mentioned the hare's secret. What does it mean?" Clara's voice was faint but firm. "It's just a phrase, something father said once." Her vagueness was telling, and Poirot pressed no further, sensing she was protecting someone. As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered, studying the hair crest above the fireplace. The note's warnings, "Judgment falls today," suggested the killer planned to strike again, or to frame another. The egg hunt, he realized, was not just a tradition, but a stage for deception. Its symbolism twisted to conceal the truth. With evening approaching, Poirot knew the next hours would be critical. The killer was close, their mask slipping, and Hercule Poirot would be ready to catch them when it fell. Chapter 9. Twists of Betrayal. As the sun dipped below the horizon on Easter Sunday, Blackwood Manor was cloaked in a twilight that mirrored the deepening mystery of Sir Reginald Hargrove's murder. The festive trappings of the day, the egg hunt, the vibrant decorations, felt like a cruel mockery against the backdrop of death. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing-room, the golden egg and its ominous note on the table before him, the ornate dagger wrapped carefully in his handkerchief. The clues, the poisoned egg, the torn handkerchief, the cryptic notes, the unsigned will, and now the dagger, formed a complex web, and Poirot's little grey cells were poised to unravel its final threads. The killer, he sensed, was growing desperate, their carefully laid plans fraying under scrutiny. The household gathered once more, their faces etched with exhaustion and suspicion. Edward's eyes burned with a mix of anger and fear, his earlier confidence eroded. Beatrice, her composure brittle, clutched a glass of water, her fingers trembling. Clara, pale but resolute, sat beside Miss Lydia Grey, whose protective gaze seemed to conceal as much as it revealed her mare. Lionel, the cousin, leaned against the fireplace, his usual charm replaced by a tense silence. Reverend Vale, his prayer book forgotten, stared out the window, while Mrs. Evelyn Crane and Jenkins hovered at the room's edges, their loyalty to the family strained by the day's events. Constable Harris, still present, deferred to Poirot, his notepad filled with scribbles he barely understood. Poirot addressed the group, his voice calm but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs, the killer has played a clever game, using Easter's symbols, the egg, the hare, to weave a deception. But the truth, it begins to emerge. The note in the golden egg, the dagger in the rose bushes, these are not mere clues, but attempts to mislead. Tonight, we will unmask the culprit." His words sent a ripple through the room. Edward's jaw tightened, Beatrice's glass clinked against the table, and Clara's eyes met Poirot's with a flicker of something. Defiance, perhaps, or fear. He began with a revelation, holding up the golden egg's note. "The hare's judgment falls today." "This," he said, is not just a taunt but a promise. The killer intended to strike again, or to ensure another takes the blame. He turned to Lionel, whose discovery of the egg had been suspiciously swift. "Monsieur Hargrove, you found this egg with ease. Did you place it there?" Lionel's grin faltered. "I told you it was luck. Why would I plant a note accusing myself?" Poirot's eyes narrowed, perhaps to divert suspicion. "Your alibi at the Red Lion is unconfirmed, and your debts, they are well known." Lionel's face reddened, but he said nothing, his silence damning. Next, Poirot addressed Beatrice. "Mademoiselle, you found your father's body, yet your walk at dawn was convenient. And your resentment of his control, did it drive you to act?" Beatrice's voice was sharp. "I loved him, despite everything. I'd never—" She broke off, her eyes glistening, and Poirot noted her genuine grief, though it did not rule out guilt. Clara, when questioned, spoke softly about her diary's mention of the hare's secret. "It was something father said years ago," she murmured, "about a family truth hidden in plain sight." Poirot pressed her, but Miss Grey interjected, "She's too frail for this, monsieur." Poirot's gaze lingered on the nurse, whose defensiveness suggested more than concern. The tension broke with an unexpected interruption. Mrs. Crane, stepping forward, her voice trembling, revealed a bombshell. "I saw something last night, sir, before the vigil. Miss Grey was in the kitchen, alone, near the chocolates." The room erupted. Edward accused Miss Grey of poisoning the candies, while Clara protested, her voice rising. Miss Grey's face paled, but she said coolly, "I was checking Miss Clara's dietary needs, nothing more." Poirot's moustache twitched. The chocolates tainted with cyanide were meant for the Easter baskets. Had Miss Grey tampered with them? Or was Mrs. Crane deflecting suspicion? Poirot's questions were cut short by a sudden commotion outside. Jenkins burst in, breathless. "There's someone in the garden, sir, near the fountain." Poirot, moving with surprising agility, led the group outside, his cane tapping urgently. In the twilight, a figure darted through the shadows, disappearing into the oak grove. Edward and Lionel gave chase, while Poirot examined the fountain, finding a fresh clue. A small key, engraved with the hare crest, tucked into the same hidden compartment he'd discovered earlier. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, pocketing it. "The hare, it reveals its secrets." The chase yielded nothing. The figure vanished, but the key was a breakthrough. Poirot returned to the manor, summoning the household to the library, where he revealed the key's significance. This unlocks something vital, perhaps the heirloom box Sir Reginald guarded, or another secret tied to the will. He watched their reactions. Edward's eyes widened, Beatrice gasped, and Clara's hands tightened on her shawl. Miss Grey's expression remained impassive, but Reverend Vale's fingers twitched as if tempted to speak. Poirot's next move was to search Clara's room, with her reluctant permission. There, hidden in a drawer, he found a letter from Sir Reginald, dated a week ago, outlining his plan to place Clara's inheritance in a trust controlled by Miss Grey. The letter hinted at distrust of Edward and Beatrice, suggesting they might contest the will. Poirot's mind raced. Was Miss Grey protecting Clara, or manipulating her for control of the fortune? The diary, which he re-examined, contained a new entry. "Elle knows the truth but won't speak." Lionel, or someone else? As night fell, Poirot gathered the household again, his voice grave. "The key, the letter, the chocolates, they point to a secondary plot. Someone sought to frame another, using the egg hunt to plant false clues." But the killer's true motive lies in the will and the hare's secret. He revealed the letter, watching as Edward's face darkened, accusing Miss Grey of scheming with Clara. Beatrice, tearful, admitted to knowing about the trust but swore she had no part in murder. Lionel, cornered, confessed to owing debts but denied planting the note or dagger, claiming he'd seen Edward near the fountain before dawn. The accusation spiraled until a new witness emerged. Molly, the barmaid from the Red Lion, summoned by Constable Harris at Poirot's request. She confirmed Lionel's alibi for part of the night, but added he left early, around 2 a.m., muttering about settling a score. Lionel's protests were drowned out by Edward's shout, "You were in the garden, weren't you?" Poirot silenced them, his mind piecing together the final clues. The key unlocked the heirloom box, which contained documents proving Lionel's debts were tied to a scheme to defraud Sir Reginald. But was Lionel the killer, or a pawn? As the household dispersed, Poirot stood by the fireplace, the hair-crest looming above. The night's chase, the key, the letter, all pointed to a betrayal deeper than greed. The killer had orchestrated a web of misdirection, but Poirot was closing in. Tomorrow, in the final reckoning, he would lay bare the truth, exposing the heart of the Easter Sunday mystery. Chapter 10. The Final Revelation. The night of Easter Sunday enveloped Blackwood Manor in a quiet that felt more like a held breath than peace. The moon cast silver light across the gardens, illuminating the hare fountain, its stone eyes glinting as if privy to the secrets now unravelling. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing-room, the heart of the manor, where the Hargrove family and their circle gathered for what he had promised would be the denouement of the Easter Sunday mystery. The clues, the poisoned egg, the torn handkerchief, the cryptic notes, the unsigned will, the tainted chocolates, the dagger and the key had woven a complex tapestry, but Poirot's little grey cells had traced its threads to their source. Tonight, he would unmask Sir Reginald Hargrove's killer. The room was heavy with anticipation. Edward stood by the fireplace, his hands clenched, his earlier bravado replaced by a wary tension. Beatrice, seated on a velvet sofa, gripped a handkerchief, her auburn hair catching the lamplight. Clara, frail but alert, sat beside Miss Lydia Grey, whose protective demeanour now seemed strained. Lionel, the cousin, leaned against a wall, his usual charm absent, his eyes darting nervously. Reverend Vale clutched his prayer book, his scholarly air fraying, while Mrs. Evelyn Crane and Jenkins stood near the door, their faces etched with unease. Constable Harris, notepad in hand, deferred to Poirot, who stood at the room's centre, his presence commanding silence. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice steady, "a crime has been committed in this house. A murder cloaked in the symbols of Easter, resurrection, betrayal, judgment. Sir Reginald Hargrove was poisoned, his death staged to appear as an accident, with a shattered egg as its signature. But the killer? They underestimated Hercule Poirot. The little grey cells, they see what is hidden, and tonight the truth will rise." He began by laying out the evidence, his words precise. The poisoned egg laced with cyanide was no ordinary decoration. It was crafted to kill, its gold paint a deliberate flourish. The handkerchief, torn and marked with H, was caught on a rosebush, suggesting a struggle, or a plant. The notes, "The hare sees all, judgment falls today," were warnings, meant to taunt or mislead. The unsigned will, the tainted chocolates, the dagger, the key, all were pieces of a puzzle designed to obscure the motive. Control of Sir Reginald's fortune. Poirot turned to the will, holding up the draft he'd found. This document, unsigned, favoured Edward, but placed Clara's inheritance in a trust controlled by Miss Grey. It sparked resentment. Edward, you argued with your father over money. Beatrice, you chafed at his control. Clara, your diary spoke of the heir's secret, a truth your father guarded. He paused, noting their reactions. Edward's scowl, Beatrice's trembling hands, Clara's steady gaze. He then revealed the key's significance. This key, found in the fountain's compartment, unlocks the heirloom box in Sir Reginald's study. Inside, I found documents proving Lionel's debts were tied to a scheme to defraud Sir Reginald, a motive, perhaps for murder. Lionel protested. I didn't kill him. I owed him, yes, but I'd never. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Your alibi is weak, monsieur, but there is more. Poirot turned to Miss Grey, whose composure faltered. Mademoiselle, you were seen near the chocolates, which were poisoned. Your control over Clara's trust gave you power and motive. Did you seek to secure her fortune? Miss Grey's eyes flashed. I care only for Clara's health. Clara, however, spoke softly. Lydia has been loyal, monsieur. She wouldn't harm father. Poirot noted the nurse's relief, but his suspicions lingered. He then addressed the notes, producing the 3 he'd found. These were written by the same hand, their ink and slant identical. They point to the hare, the manor's crest, a symbol of vigilance. But who placed them, and why? He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. The killer sought to frame another, using the egg hunt to plant the dagger and the golden egg's note. But one detail betrayed them. Poirot revealed his breakthrough. The footprint near the body, a man's size 10, matched shoes found in Edward's room, though he claimed to be asleep. You were in the garden, Monsieur Edward, before dawn. Why? Edward's face reddened. I was restless, that's all. I didn't see father. Poirot's gaze was unyielding. Yet the handkerchief, with your initial, was torn on the rosebush where the dagger was found. A coincidence? The room tensed as Poirot wove the clues together. The killer poisoned Sir Reginald with cyanide, likely in his evening tea, knowing he walked early. The egg was placed to suggest a ritual, the notes to sow fear. But the true motive was not just money, it was betrayal, rooted in a secret Sir Reginald kept. He turned to Clara, whose diary had hinted at the hare's secret. Mademoiselle, you wrote of a truth hidden in plain sight. What was it? Clara, her voice faint but clear, spoke. Father told me years ago about a scandal, a child born out of wedlock, hidden to protect the family's name. He said the hair crest was a reminder to guard it. The room erupted. Edward swore, Beatrice gasped, and Lionel's face paled. Poirot seized the moment. This child, they are here, we? And Sir Reginald's new will threatened to reveal them, or disinherit them. He turned to Reverend Vale, whose hands trembled. You, monsieur, knew of this secret. Sir Reginald confided in you, seeking to atone through charity, but you had another role. Poirot revealed his final clue. A letter found in the heirloom box, written by Sir Reginald to Vale, naming him as the guardian of a trust for an illegitimate child. Lionel. You, Monsieur Lionel, are the child, hidden to preserve the Hargrove name. The will would have exposed you, costing you your claim. Lionel's grin vanished, his voice hoarse. I didn't know, not until recently. But Poirot was relentless. You knew enough to act. You poisoned the tea, placed the egg, and planted the dagger to frame Edward. The notes were your flourish, a taunt to mask your fear. Lionel lunged forward, but Jenkins restrained him, his own loyalty to Sir Reginald outweighing his silence. Poirot concluded, his voice solemn. The hare saw all, Monsieur Lionel. Your betrayal, your greed, it led to murder. But Easter, it speaks of renewal, and justice is served. Constable Harris, prompted by Poirot, arrested Lionel, who slumped in defeat. The family, stunned, absorbed the truth. Edward's anger, Beatrice's pain, Clara's quiet strength, all were freed from suspicion. As the household dispersed, Poirot stood by the window, the moonlit fountain a silent witness. The mystery was solved, the killer unmasked, and Blackwood Manor could begin to heal. He thought of Easter's promise, resurrection, redemption, and smiled faintly. The little grey cells had triumphed, bringing light to the darkest of secrets.